Start in a few minutes. At Ukraine Crisis Media Center, Kakha Bendukidze, Georgian reformer, businessman, philanthropist. As you know, Ukraine in the past couple of years has been often compared to Georgia, and in the light of the recent events, it was a comparison of similar scenarios in terms of Abkhazia and Georgia and invasion in 2008. But before, in those few years before all the events that started unfolding, we were over in terms of the reforms that this country has undergone, and we're happy to welcome Mr. Bendukidze at Ukraine Crisis Media Center because he was the author and the organizer of these reforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this kind introduction. I can speak English, I'll speak Russian. Okay. Спасибо. Здравствуйте.
First of all, I will say a few words, and then I will be ready to answer your questions. I would like to say that the country is in a very difficult situation. In fact, I do not know. I have never met such situations, have never seen such a complicated situation in any country. I was providing advice to the leaders of different countries after my Georgian career. And it's difficult even for me to imagine, because your situation in the economy is so bad. You have a very difficult political situation, external political situation. Political situation is such that even some simple solutions become impossible. But you need to move somewhere. And there could be no case when everything's fine in the economy, but everything's bad in politics. Always, everything is interrelated. I cannot show you the demonstration which I prepared, the presentation that I prepared for my Ukrainian friends. Ukraine has nothing to be proud of. Ukraine, among all the former Soviet republics in the last 20 years, has demonstrated the slowest rates of development. There has been no one in the last 20 years who would be developing so slowly. And even in the world, there are few countries that would be growing so slowly. Ukraine is the leader in non-conducting reforms, non-implementing reforms. And unfortunately, in the recent years, the economic and social policy of Ukraine were awful. And all this put together makes a very bad impression. I'm not sure that the IMF does everything adequately. They do understand many things correctly. Reforms which are to be implemented, especially because of talking about because of what was happening in the last 5 years, these reforms will be very painful. But it is about whether either Ukraine has to implement reforms, even though they are very difficult, but then Ukraine can survive. But if it doesn't implement any reforms, Ukraine will not survive. It could have seemed like a theater performance some time ago. really talking about life and death of the state. And if you do not remove all these energy subsidies which make you politically vulnerable, if you do not liquidate this awful social policy, if you do not reform all other sectors of economy, if you do not create a normal acting army, then you have to say goodbye to the country, to the state. When I was a small boy, I was 5, my grandmother took me to Kiev. That was the first city I saw after in 1961. My uncle worked in Kiev in aviation plant, and since then I have loved this city, and that is what makes me really be concerned with the situation here. Use the microphone, please. The microphone. No, money is not needed for the reform. The subsidies, there are two parts in them. Some subsidies which are paid directly from the budget, and the second part is what the budget doesn't receive because the oil and gas sector is organized improperly. According to the IMF, the direct subsidies where the money is spent directly, that's 5% GDP, and what is called post-tax, this money, the money which isn't received, it's 12% of the GDP. 12% of the GDP you waste. And there are two things related to that. Why it is harmful, we can argue about that, but that's really harmful. First of all, it's like a black hole in the economy, a black hole which consumes resources but doesn't produce anything. And because of that, you have a huge consumption of gas. You consume gas like a big, very well-developed country, because you consume too many energy, too much of energy resources. If you do not consume so much, you will not have to import so much gas from Russia. That's the problem that I've been hearing for the last 20 years. Ukraine gas, Ukraine, Ukraine Gazprom. This vicious circle will be broken. If the prices for gas were market prices here, then you wouldn't have to import later. All that could produce dual effect. First, it's normalization and recovering of the Ukrainian economy, and the second is you will not have this awful dependence on Russian gas, which makes you so vulnerable. Because you are the second largest consumer of gas, buyer of gas from Gazprom. That have to do, and that's harmful. That should be accompanied by some targeted assistance to people who are poor people. This should be done. That's the price. Some people go and fight battles for independence. Others have to agree to the reform, have to agree that the gas price is subsidized. That is what the nation has to decide. What do you change your independence for? Ukraine talking about the level, there is such a parameter. How much energy in different forms, electric energy, heat, coal, produce $1 of GDP. Ukraine spends more than Germany, more than Russia. Only Turkmenistan spends more. But in Turkmenistan they have their own gas and it's basically free. It's distributed in the economy of Georgia is more or less the same as the economy of Ukraine. Talking about GDP per capita, but you spend 4 times more energy for the same level of life, the same standard of life. You spend 8 times more energy to produce GDP than Germany, 8 times more than Germany. This cannot be the situation that should last. And that's the major question. That's the main thing which is important for the survival of Ukrainian nation. I'm sorry if I say some unpleasant things, but probably it's better to say unpleasant things than later you will think that this could be avoided.
Information agency for comics, Oksana Melnichuk. We're very fond of our Georgian colleagues, partners, friends, and we expect to hear from our Georgian colleagues, friends, more advice, more consultation, how to survive. We hope that we will survive and overcome. Yes. This crisis. So the practical question, how did you overcome corruption? How you got rid of the old Soviet enterprises in Georgia? How did you overcome unemployment? You won't overcome unemployment in short term. This is an illusion. There are no quick methods how to get rid of poverty and become rich country, even if you implement very radical reforms. Then in some 10 years you will be at the level of Bulgaria and Romania. If you would implement very, very radical reforms, you will be at their today's level. To overcome corruption, to eliminate corruption, you should establish the system of power which is able to eradicate corruption. Do you have such a system of power today? This is a simple question. To eradicate corruption doesn't mean that you should bring poison over some place. It means that the president and the prime minister and the parliament should put to the first place under their personal control, and they should become the objects of monitoring, anti-corruption monitoring. Another thing, recommendations. In Ukraine, there is very complicated legislation, much barriers for business, and too much bureaucracy, which means that you are very vulnerable for corruption. There is a good saying that if there are many barriers, there are many frauds, and now you have tens of thousands of bureaucrats at the central country, and I assess that there are hundreds of them at the regional level. Do you need this number of bureaucrats? I believe that much lower level of them would be sufficient, and having lesser numbers of bureaucrats, it would be easier to monitor them against corruption, and moreover, you do not have an agency responsible for anti-corruption measures. Usually, corruption could not be eradicated totally in one moment. You can decrease it in percentage, for example, and I believe that you have enough courage to be able to decrease corruption radically. So you requested for practical advice. So my advice is to get more courage and get rid of some minor things. Start doing practical things. And for example, once in Georgia, we had a meeting which was held during 5 months, and they proclaimed the slogans against me. They made hooligans attacks. They threw a bottle with water into my car against my anti-corruption measures, but I survived, and we should do such things and have enough courage to do them. I would like to continue the question. Would you please describe the parameters of reform in Georgia? How did you cut off the number of ministries? How this reflected in cut off corruption? And the second question for Ukraine, it's now important to get those money which previous Ukrainian authority transferred to abroad. Or what do you think? How can we expect for bringing back those money? I will start from the last question. Now you want to say that the previous bureaucrats have stolen 70 billion. They were able to transfer those 70 billion somewhere. 70 billion, that's too much. I believe that if they spoiled some 70 billion, but they have stolen only 7 billion out of them. And looking at the example of Nigeria, Philippines, this experience shows that bringing back the money which was stolen takes some dozens of years. Of course, we should do this, but it will take. Can say about my ministry?
When I was the minister, there were 2,500 people working there. We took it. We decreased the number to 600. And in other ministries, it was even more drastic. The Ministry of Agriculture was reduced their number of people by 5 or 6 times. Some other ministries several times reduced the number of people working. Within 1 month, we dismissed all the people who worked in the, and we enrolled new ones who didn't have any special training, and everything was fine. So basically, the eyes were afraid, but the hands were doing. We did not save much in the budget. We just corruption, we improved revenues to the budget went up, and probably, well, people started receiving good salaries. Before that, the salaries were symbolic, and probably we were spending more money for salaries, but still. I have become the minister, I became the minister a week ago, and I have for different employees, and I just wanted to talk to one person, and I decided, okay, I will look at what salary he's getting, and his salary was like $15 a month, and I just think I'm receiving $15, but his position was not administrative, couldn't have been taking bribes. And I was thinking, this person will come in and probably he will come in all naked because he has no money, or maybe he will faint because he's hungry. But then this person came and I found out that he lectures somewhere, he is consulting the World Bank, but it was clear that he was formally getting for that salary wouldn't be enough for him even to come to my office by underground. And all the money that we saved, all this money was spent for salaries to those people who we still had. But that was just small part. If you are not fighting, if you're not just doing it, just fighting corruption will not help. Visna Kremenchuka, please tell us, our city, Kremenchuk is the city of heavy machine building. All the production was oriented towards cooperation with Russia. What do we do now? That means that we will have to fire people. I believe for more than 15 years in my life I was involved in heavy industry. I was the general director of the United Machine Building plants. You probably know Novokramatorsk machine building plants. There were several plants like that, United. I was working on that, but at the same time, I know more or less the heavy industry in your country, in Ukraine, and I can tell you that it could be quite competitive. Probably that's not the main sector that would be prospering, but there is a big experience in Czech country, in Slovak Republic, Hungary, Poland, Baltic states. You're not the only country that had heavy machine building in Poland and Czech Republic, a lot of heavy machine building in Slovak Republic and Hungary. In all these countries, that was in heavy machine building. It was sold, then it went bankrupt. I was probably the third one who procured it. There are no simple recipes, but people of Ukraine should understand. You cannot just take care of these plants. Because of that, you have this very slow rate of development. There are attempts to subsidize low gas prices, and they just live like in the past. They are dreaming about the state plan. So that's like a drug, like narcotic. The cheap gas is like a drug. You become addicted to it. Whether this is a very specific advice or not, I don't know, but I do care about what will be happening here, because your country is so much tied up to Georgia. If Ukraine loses, then Georgia will lose. It's not like an interview, it's almost like I'm almost like a preacher here. yesterday at the economic conference, and today we know you talk to politicians in Ukraine. Do you believe that they really listen to the lessons? What are your best practices that you can share with us? With those people who I met, I can say that there is understanding, just partial understanding. There is no full understanding on their behalf. And I am not leaving this country satisfied. I believe there's no understanding because the solutions, they're trying to find solutions according to old standards of making decisions. I haven't heard anyone who would be saying how painful it will be to reform some of the sectors of the economy. That is why I am such a careful optimist, or maybe light of a pessimist. One understands everything. Thank you. Thank you.